things built, in more recently, and I would say COVID and beyond COVID, is where we've seen more product innovation, more technology ownership end to end, more accountability globally, where your own goals are actually determined by the business goals. And I think that's now transforming into, when I look at it today and where I'm sitting, is there's a much closer client alignment. No story lasts for more than 2-3 years at max, right? So the evolution of these things is pretty rapid, and therefore you and the rest of your management team or the people you work with have to adapt to that. I can be successful only if the organization is successful as a whole. Right? To call out and say that I am successful when the organization or the business or the function isn't doing that well is actually a fallacy.
Welcome to GCC Unplugged, a podcast where real leaders share raw insights. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Arindam Banerjee, Executive Vice President and Country Head for State Street India. Arindam brings nearly 4 decades of cross-functional experience in financial services and operational leadership, having led major global delivery functions across top institutions before steering State Street's India franchise. Arindam, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Saurabh, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Same here. So, first question, as I said, your career, almost 4 decades, has spanned over technology leadership across delivery, product transformation. If you can tell us that where your journey kind of moved towards this intersection of engineering and capability delivery.
So it's quite interesting, and like you may hear from other people you've met, sometimes careers get defined by accidents,
Right.
and it has very much been my case as well. So uh, I was never designed to be an accountant. I became an accountant. All my school, I went into armed forces schools, and I thought that's where I would land up. And uh, whatever the circumstances was, I broke a leg, ended up not getting through my NDA, and in some ways sitting at home and saying, okay, what next? And I just saw that there was something called a Bachelor of Commerce, and there was something called a Chartered Accountant
Yeah.
Institute. So I started with both. I was fortunate enough, to get picked up as an article clerk with, at that time, what was called Pricewaterhouse and today's PwC. And I actually landed up, as a chartered accountant, funnily enough, in the top ranked students in that subject, and came out of that in the first attempt, which was very rare in those days. Uh, but in nutshell, what happened to me was I went into, in those days again, the people who used to come into campuses um, were largely the Tatas, the L&Ts, the ANZs, and the Citibanks of the world. So amongst other things, I took the decision to join L&T.
Okay.
And that's when I joined them actually in Powai and Paradise State in Bombay. And that was my first, I would say, I was a financial accountant in a shipping division in an engineering company, right? And so the bulk of the people you would meet day in and day out and talk to had that engineering mindset. So even though I was an accountant, I think thinking the way of an engineer into financial problems, as I looked into ship financing and in the shipping business, that came part of my DNA. It was a learning experience, which honestly I would even today say that that was the best I had. They were never the best paymasters, but there was a tremendous amount of learning in those early career days as a graduate finance trainee. Uh, that division got sold. I was interestingly It gave me my first exposure into FX as a business. It gave me my first exposure to global businesses, because shipping, which very few people know, is that it's a very, very global business,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
And ship financing. Um, when I was looking for my next opportunity, quite accidentally, I applied for a financial controller role for an investment bank, and that was a JV between ICICI and JP Morgan, both very well known names. And um, maybe a surprise, but I did get in. I got selected for the role, and I remember asking my boss in those days in Singapore that why did you pick me? I had zero investment banking experience for the last 6 years, and there were good reasons he explained to me, which obviously was good to hear. But the next sort of 3 years that I was in this joint venture structure between ICICI and JP Morgan, two really great names in
Mm.
this industry. Um, it was interesting because I sat in that role almost like a neutral umpire between two
The two
sparring
heavyweights.
partners, at the same time building some of the highest class businesses at that time, the launch of the primary dealership, a broker dealer entity, a investment banking franchise, and at the same time, you could see and visualize that this was a joint venture which was going to break at some point of time, and that's what happened in '98, and that was a period where I got hired by JP Morgan directly as their CFO in India, but at the same time, there was a lot to do in terms of the setup of the bank, the broker dealer entity, etc. It gave me an experience in setup and design, technology. The technology we used in the branch in those days in Bombay, I recollect, was a AS400 financial ledger, which was only implemented in Argentina before that. So, sitting in Ballard Estate in the evening and talking with colleagues in Argentina was always a late night, but it was an interesting experience where again the intermingling of business and technology actually started happening right then all over again, right? Which is the right technology to build and scale the business. So that went really well, and I actually uh, at that point of time, what happened was my boss, who had hired me years back, he moved from being the financial controller for the region to being the COO and the tech and ops head for JP Morgan and APAC. And I won't take the name. There was another person who went on to do very well, who got hired for that role, as there was an expatriate before that, and he backed off in the last minute. And my boss basically said, why don't you give a shot at this role? Because there's an urgency in taking that role up. The branch had just started, etc. And I actually said, why not? So I ended up moving from finance as a CFO to being the COO and tech and ops. And I amuse myself because the same guy I asked again is, why did you ever move me? And no technology experience. Uh, So that went on very well for a couple of years. A neat, small franchise, quality business was built. Uh, then we got bought out by then Chase Manhattan Bank and what became JP Morgan Chase, etc. And that also included, Jardine Fleming in the region. So there was a three of everything in Bombay. And he at that point of time I said, why don't you step out of India and come to Singapore to manage sort of the project manage technology and operations in 9 locations, including India, in terms of what was called shared tech and ops. So I went, and it was a difficult period because you can imagine the merger dynamics that came out of it. And that actually, was, I would say, a lot of people were let go. efficiencies were achieved, like in any M&A, and the business was stabilized. Single platforms were integrated into from disparate platforms of three different banks. Uh, Great experience, and by then, my boss had changed. The new person came in. We started having the initial ideas around building offshore centers or offshore work in India. And that had actually started in a small way within the JP Morgan branch as well. That we were doing some activities for Asia Pacific, which was beyond India. Uh, so when he said that, will you go back to India to set this up? Uh, Almost without batting an eyelid, I said yes. And that was more because I thought that it was a experience which would, be very, very different from the path that I was on that time. That's how I came into what's today known as the GSC or the corporate centers of JP Morgan. I was there as the CEO and head of transitions for the first couple of years. Um, Great stories in terms of those early days in 2002 to 2004 and how some of the work came in, and plenty of stories on that. But that sort of defined me thereafter for the next now 24 years, right? Which is JP Morgan led to Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank led to a consulting career for a short while in EY. EY led to Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo led to State Street, and I'm still enjoying myself. But all of these, connections between uh, functions, and more particularly how technology works with business, has always been the advantage of what you do in India, right? So by bringing teams together and making them work together uh, has been, um, pretty much every aspect of the work that I've done ever since. Long answer, but
No,
hopefully.
of course. No, I see you said you're enjoying, ever since, and I see that you're enjoying this, putting together, as you said, teams, different functions, but, as a unit, a solid unit working towards a similar business goal. I guess that's a
Yep.
very enjoyable thing. And, you've seen multiple cycles of change, I believe, now that you told us the story for of your career from traditional IT delivery to digital transformation and now AI automation led models. How has your worldview changed, in terms of both leadership and execution as you see it today versus say how it was when you were at JP Morgan, when you joined JP Morgan, came back to India 20, 23 years ago?
Completely different, right? When we looked at it in JP Morgan, it's a two realizations I've had through these 24 years is that no story lasts for more than 2, 3 years at max, right? So the evolution of these things is pretty rapid, and therefore you and the rest of your management team or the people you work with have to adapt to that. In way back in, and the thinking can be very different organization wise as well. So if I recollect, when we first did the pilots in the old JP Morgan, the discussion on the management table when we put those 20 people, like I mentioned in the branch in Mumbai, it was let's put the most complex things there. Because if we can do the most complex things, thereafter everything becomes easy. Right? But when the firm merged and they looked at it at a much larger scale, naturally, the view was let's put the vanilla horizontals, things that we can actually easily manage, standardized, uh, out there first. Uh, but everybody looked at it at that point of time. It was very, very functionally aligned. Let's do the best job of the job or the process that you get or the technology teams that you get, and let's excel functionally. Let's make sure that the, the targets are no worse than where you were before you moved things, right? Uh, then you moved into an era where there was a lot of thinking in terms of, I would say, once things had established better in India, 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, was let's start looking at cross-functional aspects of this, right? How do we connect the teams to deliver? Which those days agile was not the norm, but you had to start thinking about common objective, what's the goal, what's the purpose, and you started, working far deeper with some of the external vendors as well. A lot of these firms always had external vendor footprints as well. So bringing together the network was the next part of the story. The third part of the story is for every firm, I think at least in the ones I worked in, India became too big, right? There was too much risk sitting over here. So then the thought was, can we replicate this model in other parts of the world? And that's what actually took me to UK for 5, 6 years, where the principal objective was to start building centers in other parts of the world, which would pair up with India, and we had a proper model in place. Uh, then, the next phase was, as I've seen it, was okay. How can we take accountability? Right? How can we take up ownership? Right? But they were very much at a second or third level, right? But as things built, in more recently, and I would say COVID and beyond COVID, is where we've seen more product innovation, more technology ownership end to end, more accountability globally, where your own goals are actually determined by the business goals. And I think that's now transforming into, when I look at it today and where I'm sitting, is there's a much closer client alignment as well. So it's that everything we do, how we align with our clients and the end metrics that they see and how they evaluate us, you're very much integrated into that process. You're also expected now to lead the firm in many places. Right? So the thought leadership starts evolving from here. Right? The context of what we call, if you want to call it GCC, has changed rapidly, and it's not about captives to GIC to GCC. Actually, that's not the point. It's the context of how you do and what you do, and how you fit into the global enterprise that goes through generational changes. And I'm actually extremely satisfied the way it has evolved in this industry. If you talk to any of my peers, uh, it's a shift which is massively benefited all the leaders that we have brought into the system. And if you just think about it, there is very few markets in the world where some of the experience we have has been there for 20, 25, 30 years. Right? So it's about, I tell myself and everybody I come across is that we have everything. Let's now decide what we want to do with it.
That's a billion dollar question, honestly. That we have everything. Where do we go from now? And I think in my conversation with leaders from across industries operating in the capability center, capabilities space, it's very clear that we need to seize the momentum that we have got, and everyone's geared up towards to do that. And having said that, you said that you're like it has not happened in one day. It has happened over the years. The foundation has been laid, and then we have reached here. Similarly, State Street also has a long presence in India, and you've been delivering critical technology and operational value. So, how is the role of this center? And as you said, that whether we are a part of the enterprise or not, that's the main question that we need to. If I fail today, will the enterprise be affected or not? Is the question probably we need to answer, and that's my question to you also. That how is the role of the capability center evolved in the overall ecosystem of states?
So first of all, right from our CEO Ron to pretty much every executive member team I've spoken to since the day I've joined, including the people who hired me, right? they don't like the word center, they don't like the word hub, they don't like the word offshore. So in some, even GCC included. So the identity that we try and create with our employees is your State Street in Bangalore, in Pune, in Bombay, wherever it may be, and your aspirations and careers are not very different from what you would have at State Street in Poland or State Street in Boston. It's the same enterprise, right? So our alignment models on how we map into the global organization is like it would be anywhere else in the world. There's no sort of any doubt about that, and it's very clear that's the positioning we want to have, right? We will share the benefits and gains of State Street as well as the pains when they come about. We're just as important to them. Now, in the case of State Street, we have a lot of people here. So that comes with a huge amount of responsibility. So, to everybody that, I made the statement to the large number of people in State Street when I joined is one of the core things we have to keep in mind is uh, we have to own the burden of responsibility on our shoulders, right? There is a huge responsibility which is entrusted on us by the work that we do for our clients, right? And that's not somebody else's burden. That's our burden, and every single individual in this organization should start feeling that way, right? What we do for our clients is first and foremost, and therefore that needs to be felt by each one of us. So I think that's the core way of how we look at this as an organization. It is not a COE, it's not a GCC, it's not anything, right? It is like any other office of State Street.
Yes, of course. And this is a very, I would say, a very optimistic way of looking at it, in which now more and more leaders are looking at that we are one of the offices of your respective organization, and you're delivering the same value. And even for the talent, I mean, they should also be aspiring to, be at par with their counterparts across the world and get the same treatment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in your view, like what differentiates, like India offers, and I would not use the word center again, as you said, that it's not something we like, especially in the global financial, services context.
Yeah, it's something that I mentioned earlier. It's when you have everything. What defines you is what you do with it. Right? Then you sort of go a little one step back and say, okay, with everything that I have, which other location of the bank can give a coverage which looks across all functions, businesses within the bank, and looks across every region of the bank, right? And you'll find that there's probably the only location is in India. And I would argue that for most institutions that is the case, right? That you're looking at US clients, you're looking at European clients, APAC clients, businesses which originate across the world, because most other hubs, they tend to have regional focuses, right? And historically, these used to be done in a dispersed manner. So, in many ways, the firms have the opportunity now to look at everything in one place, across regions, across functions. Yes, there's that last mile into the client, which there's a lot of work which is done to the client, so we understand the clients and client service. But naturally, we're not allowed to sell, right? That's still a function which is in the client market facing location. But that's an experience that people will gather over time, right? But I actually think it's now got to the point when you have all of this, what are you doing with it? And the second thing is, I've argued this with multiple people, the industry bodies and the government is, the great thing is the government has done a little bit of work in this year's budget, which is this industry has moved way beyond the traditional definition of IT and ITES. Right? It's much beyond that. And what every one of us does is, almost like any head office location,
mm,
right? Every function. And so it's, many years back, people talked about the second headquarters and things like that. I don't think I would describe it as that, but it's like that's how you're going to evolve.
mm,
With the scale, the responsibility is massive,
mm,
and with the scale, the opportunity is massive.
mm. No, no, absolutely. That is what I guess is, making everyone stand up and notice about this ecosystem that has suddenly become so big that it's unignorable, if I may say. You know. And so, as the next, I would want to understand from you, how do you, kind of ensure that the capability that is done here is like a thinking partner to the organization, and it influences the business strategy, it influences the innovation roadmap of the enterprise worldwide, in Poland, beach, US, wherever.
I think if you focus on the client,
Mm,
and that's the thing where many organizations have not got it right, and either in the initial years or is when they persist on, you know, not identifying with the end client.
mm,
When you start thinking of your success being defined by the end client success, very naturally the right metrics will flow
mm,
through on what is expected of you. So in my view, that identification with client metrics is critically important. It is critically important that all these locations identify with overall corporate objectives.
mm,
And we don't get tied down to having specific India objectives or specific India goals, which again is sometimes I've seen that happening is a bit of a mistake in my view,
mm,
which is I can be successful only if the organization is successful as a whole,
mm,
right? To call out and say that I am successful when the organization or the business or the function isn't doing that
mm,
well is actually a fallacy.
yeah,
So I think that's, you know, strategic alignment of goals and objectives with your clients, with your global businesses, with your corporate as a whole,
mm,
right, is the number one thing you have to get done
mm,
to avoid getting derailed.
mm. No, of course, if the overall output is unable to move the business needle, I mean, then what's the point?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
of having
Yeah.
something. Yeah, correct. So, and having said that, and you also spoke about that we have everything, and now we have to decide what we're going to do from here. If I may ask you, what is the kind of trap that probably you have seen that one should not fall into if this space is
Yeah,
to
I
move?
think the trap, in my view, is a few things. First of all, the trap around costs,
Mm,
right? Which is that if you start defining yourself by cost first,
mm,
as opposed to your client, your employees, your risk position, uh, you will go wrong,
mm,
right? So you have to take a composite view of what's the best outcome, which is going to come for the organization, and for that, maybe cost is not,
mm,
the parameter. Now, I'll give you early examples which I've seen, right? And I've done the same mistake in all the organizations that we've gone. When we built our first offices,
mm,
almost everybody, look at the space and the quality of space that was put in place. It was the lowest cost option,
mm,
right? Because we were playing a cost game.
mm,
Today, you universally talk to anybody as well as any new player coming in, they will say that the space standards, the technology standards, the infrastructure that we get our people to work in are going to be the same exactly across the world,
right.
right? And this has happened in 20 years,
Yeah.
right?
Mm,
So this cost dimension not being the primacy is one aspect I would say of the trap you can fall into.
mm,
And it's every organization will have financial challenges every now and then, but you have to meet them as part of a global organization. The second trap that I have seen is when we organizationally try to ring fence it,
mm,
right? And when the moment you ring fence it, it gets defined as a it's Arindam's world,
Mm,
right? Or it's XYZ's empire. And I'm sort of, when I've looked at that and I said, actually, that's the wrong way to set it up. I might be the best person in the world, my team might be the best, but if they try to ring fence themselves and create a SPV or a COE,
mm,
etc., they don't always work that way
mm,
because you grow to a point, but you lose the enterprise,
mm,
you lose the thought leadership, right? So it's okay in the early days to take a venture or a ring fenced approach, but very often, quality work and thought leadership only develops when you integrate completely with the global organization. Trust
mm,
builds.
mm,
And the third trap I would say is, you know, not taking decisions around people,
mm,
right? As we just spoke about a little while back, there's generational change happening every 3 years, right? You have to refresh your people or upskill your people or move your people by recognizing that that change is happening to that new environment every 3 years,
mm,
right? Um, if I were to hire for my job and I went in with the same answers that I had 20 years back, I
yeah,
would never get hired,
correct.
right? So it's a self learning as well as group learning that this has to evolve.
Mm. In some of the organizations,
Just to complete
yeah,
on
yeah,
that
please,
sort of,
please.
and I think the final trap which uh, I'm realizing now a lot more, quite honestly, it's more recent, is that we sometimes limit our ambitions,
Mm,
right? And I think the ambitions, obviously, that it's size and scale of our organization as a ambition is no longer irrelevant. It's the output that you create and the impact that you create for your clients, which is important. And I think we sometimes limit our ambitions on what we can do. We do that maybe because we don't know enough, or maybe we lack self-confidence. Maybe we are not willing to have that, you know, discussion that this is a possibility and be far more innovative than we've been.
mm,
I just think it's you have to avoid that trap that it peaks at a certain time,
mm,
right? Because if you peak, that means after that it's only downhill.
mm,
You just have to keep moving.
mm. I'd like to talk about, I think that was trap number two, if I'm not wrong, which is COE around, which limits your thinking possibly, or you stop from being a part of the larger. But a lot of organizations are going that mode where they have the larger ecosystem, but within that they're also creating COEs for particular probably solutions, functions, or all. You agree that works, or it again is the same
So
ring
I think
fencing?
it works in the context of a COE of a function.
Yeah.
And if that COE is global and it is understood,
Mm,
right? So bringing 10 different processes with a single horizontal, I would absolutely it works. If it
mm,
makes sense, if you can do the technology design, it makes sense. But putting a whole geography under a COE
mm,
is where I was thinking that it actually restricts.
okay.
Because I've got 100 stakeholders around the
Mm,
world.
mm,
I want each one of them to feel the success of India,
mm,
not just the team over here.
mm,
Each one of them should own and feel the success of India.
mm. It's true. Okay. I know, and you just talked about the final one, the fifth one that you talked about. Generations are changing, and so you need to refresh your people or upskill them. Uh, and you have so many, I mean, professionals and across your in your command, uh, and they would have diverse expectations. How do you manage that and that across diverse regions? I would believe.
I think the expectations is everyone has a lot of, if you want to call junior people where we have to manage their careers, and we own that,
Yes, of
right?
course.
And we owe them that as well. So as organizations evolve, I would say that it's our role to guide them and mentor them to think bigger, right? To think beyond what they see as the slate today,
Mm,
right? And always think about day after tomorrow,
mm,
right? So I think it can be molded. While it's a diverse population, it's a very generational split
right.
across. Uh, Everyone has to adapt, right? But it's also about as everyone starts getting clear on the goals and objectives, then there's no difference.
Mm,
How you get there may be different styles in place, but
mm,
uh, I don't see that as a big problem. I think, yes, you have to put in effort. You have to understand your people. You have to understand their aspirations, right? You have to encourage them because, I keep telling myself that I wish I was 20 years younger, right?
mm,
Because the possibilities I can see today with someone coming into a global organization in India
mm.
is about 100x from when I came into a global organization. And then I would encourage people to dream that way.
Mm. Okay, okay. And the final question. So you talked about the traps, or of course, we shouldn't be going there. And you talked about the opportunities that are there today with the global organizations like State Street and that it offers. What apart from this uh, keeps you optimistic about this entire space? And what do you think? Where do you think we will be in terms of output and the 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 core of enterprise in the next 4 to 5 years?
Look, I'm optimistic because there are many factors in play, right? There is now legacy knowledge in
Mm,
this geography which has been, there for 20, 25, 30 years. And while people will have aspirations on different markets and working elsewhere, a large mass is still here in India and they've developed a lot of core expertise in
right.
markets and products. So I am confident that that itself will give the momentum of innovation and change in some ways,
Mhm.
right? Provided people have the aspiration, and we should build that. Right? I think the other thing which gives me confidence is uh, this is the only geography in the world, right? And one of the very few ways it can be done at scale, right? Where you can bring technology, operations, and business product all together at scale with contemporary technologies with an ecosystem which is actually beyond the organizations like ours
Mm,
because I can see this for the last 5 or 6 years when it comes to talent. We have tremendously benefited from the evolution of the markets in India, right? Everyone talks about UPI payments. I can see it in the securities markets. The level of expertise as the markets in India have evolved has been phenomenal.
mm,
And that's helped us and the sustenance is coming from both ends. The second is that the fintech ecosystem, another great
mm,
example,
mm,
right? Or even the startup ecosystem, even as it has evolved over the last 10 years. For the first time, when in long time in history, we can actually think of product teams.
mm,
We can actually think of the way products are built and designed, etc. And there are many, many examples of that in this industry. So I think uh, technologies, core technologies, it's no longer about just having really good application developers, but you see it across the whole technology stack.
mm,
You see it across, products. You see it across software. You see it across evolution of, robotics to AI to agentic AI, etc. Expertise is there, right? Uh, I am very, very sure that we have a talent pipeline which is coming through our colleges, and I have seen actually in the last, I would say, more 5 to 10 years, a big change and evolution over there as well, right? People are coming digitally native, right? They're coming with a thinking which is very different from gradually hired. So all aspects gives me confidence. There is really no alternative if we manage this well.
Mm, mm, of course. Thank you so much, Arinda, for speaking to us. It was wonderful knowing from you who has spent so much time in this ecosystem to understand where we are and where we are headed. And as you say, good times ahead. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Saurabh. It was a good conversation. Thank
Thank
you.
you.